to the King's Information Network podcast and chapter 4 of Confronting the Past. Let's jump right in. Chapter 4. It's kind of a sad little city, isn't it? Colin asked critically as they crested the last rise before Grayspire's valley. There's a reason it's got the word gray in it, Russ replied dryly. The fog was as thick as Russ remembered it, with only the tips of Grayspire's tallest buildings peeking above it. But it's not that bad, really. You get used to the fog. Is it as thick as it seems? Colin said. Almost. It's pretty soupy. Colin glanced at him. You gonna tell me now? Russ didn't take his eyes off the city, drifting in and out of view below them. Are we going? He would put this off as long as he could. The more he worried about it, the more he feared how Colin would take the story. Colin Lockholm had never fucked up things in the way Russ had. Colin hesitated for a moment before nodding. Lead the way. Never been before. Russ snorted. Yeah, I figured. Still weird to find somewhere in Tira you haven't visited. His friend sniffed. Tease me all you want, but I'll have you know there's a lot of places I haven't been. He nudged his horse to start the descent into Grayspire. And I'll admit it, I know all about them, so it seems like I've been everywhere. You don't seem to know much about Grayspire, Russ pointed out. It doesn't usually cross my desk. I'm afraid to know why now. Grayspire has always kept its problems inside. That's probably what happened to Morgan. Someone, Russ hoped it wasn't who he thought, got wind and wanted to know why a stranger was snooping about. Ugh, she really wasn't supposed to snoop. Kin agents are kin agents, even the young ones, Russ said dryly. It's our nature, and the training. Colin made a face but didn't argue. Is Grayspire really that dangerous? Colin met his gaze finally, which he'd been avoiding during their ride. It can be, if you don't know what you're doing. Colin grimaced. I thought it was a quiet city, since it doesn't usually come up. That's why I sent Morgan by herself. I never expected... Goddamn, that'll teach me not to do my research thoroughly beforehand. I hope she's okay. Morgan's proven herself quite capable, he said, although she was plenty worried. And she's not stupid. She'll keep her head down. It's possible that's all this is. She had to dig in to avoid trouble. And if she's gotten captured, he won't kill her. Not this quickly. Who exactly is he? Grayspire is controlled by... Well, back when I was here, 5 guilds. Like a lot of guild cities, it's basically split into 5 quadrants with one central neutral space. Each guild is focused on one particular trade or livelihood. The area I lived in was fibers. My mom was a weaver. My dad did work in dyeing. He shrugged. There was also a lot of black market stuff going around. Assuming things hadn't been completely fucked since then. Matt sent him occasional updates, enough for him to know Chris had taken over one of the rival guilds and was making a nuisance of himself. Interesting, Colin mused. I wonder why that culture formed here. Well, it's just off the main trade route between Neris and Oakbridge, Russ said, so there was a high demand for both high quality and illegal goods. He smiled faintly. I was primed to join the guild based on my parents' job, and did when I was still a kid, running messages and the like after school. By the time I left, I'd seen a lot. It's part of what I suspect made you notice me, however unconsciously. You were awfully good at many of the things I was looking for, but I'd met enough people with skills picked up all over the place I wasn't about to ask. Which I appreciate, Russ said. As they reached the walls, Colin looked up, then, over at Russ. Will anyone remember you? Russ pressed his lips together. Yes, but I'm hoping we'll be able to do this quietly enough it won't matter. He knew Colin was dying to ask, and he owed the other man an explanation soon. But he had to get past the hurdle of seeing the house first. Then he could start to explain. They passed into the city without incident, and Russ confidently, even after many years away, led the way down the twisting streets to a neatly appointed house on one of the nicer back streets. There's hopefully an inn down the street where we can stable our horses for cheap, he announced. Sounds good to me. This isn't the part of the city that's unsafe, I take it? Russ glanced sidelong at him and snorted. No, it isn't. He shook his head, amused despite the pit that had formed in his stomach the moment he had laid eyes on his childhood home again. Although he pretended confidence for Colin and Soren, he still half expected to walk in and find Morgan there. Whether she'd be alive or dead, he gave equal odds. He shivered, but pushed away from the crowding memories with an assistance boarding on Desperate. It's called Ye Old Inn of Moose. It's around that first corner. You can't miss it. The sign has a giant moose on it. Colin blinked. You're kidding, right? He asked after a startled silence. Russ snorted. Trust me, you'd know if I was kidding, he informed him, and thrust his reins into Colin's hand. Giant moose on the sign. Knock, then let yourself in when you get back. You'll be all right? Russ favored him with a look. Colin sighed. All right, I'll be back shortly. Ye old inn of moose. God's breath, he muttered, as he turned and led the 2 horses down the road. Russ let out a sigh of relief. No matter what he found inside, he didn't want company for the initial return to the house he grew up in. He wondered briefly, as he stared at it, if any agents had used it, and if so, if they'd changed anything. Staring at it isn't going to do a damn thing for you, he muttered to himself. And before he could talk himself out of it, took the 3 steps to the door and flung it open. He peered inside, and relief flooded through him at the empty room. Russell moved in and noted that Morgan definitely hadn't been gone long, as they expected. The room was free of dust. Morgan had done some serious cleaning. The place was spotless, like he remembered it before. Pushing back the rising tide of memories, he kept his eyes averted from the far corner of the room and headed for the kitchen. Here, there was a bowl of bananas on the counter, still a ripe shade of yellow, and a few dirty dishes laying haphazardly in the sink. The kitchen table was clear of anything, but Russ knew any half-competent kin agent wouldn't leave evidence lying about. If Morgan had left anything here, they'd have to find it. He'd gone through half the drawers in the kitchen when he heard the front door creak open. "Russ, I'm in the kitchen," he called back. There was a pause, and then, in a voice tinged with amusement, "You do realize that means nothing to me, right?" "Straight through the living room, then you're first right," Russ said, annoyed at himself. He had to do better. Colin wasn't Matt or Shannon. Colin appeared, silhouetted in the doorway. "Find anything?" In answer, Russ waved a hand at the bananas and dishes. As suspected, she hasn't been gone long. I was looking to see if she'd left any record of her activities. "She should have, or else we didn't train her nearly well enough," Colin said. "I'll start on the other rooms down here." Russ nodded as he continued to go through the cupboards and drawers, but he came up empty, finding only food supplies. He shook his head and moved back towards the main room. He could hear Colin rummaging in the den, and, after taking a deep, fortifying breath, he headed up the stairs, listening to the familiar creaks and smiling slightly at the new one on the 3rd step. Russ paused at the landing, and, using the dust trails on the floor, was able to ascertain that no one had used any but the 2 closest rooms in a long time. His eyes briefly flickered to the room at the far end of the hall before he dragged them back to the guest room. Pushing open the door, he entered. Morgan, he realized, was not the tidiest person in the world. He suspected that the cleaning of the dust downstairs was more out of necessity than she liked her space neat. The bedspread was strewn messily, flopped halfway into the floor, and 2 empty glasses sat on the bedside table beside an open book. Absently, Russ shut the book as he studied the room, trying to remember where there might be places to hide things. It didn't help that he didn't know Morgan, and at her graduation, she'd been quiet. Still, she'd graduated near the top of her class, so she'd taken to the training. Russ wasn't sure what he thought of Colin's decision to send a teen off on her own before she'd even turned 18, but Colin knew what he was doing. A lack of knowledge about Grayspire notwithstanding, he knew the man wouldn't have done it without being sure of himself and her. He made a mental note to get to know Morgan better when they got her out of whatever mess she was in. Of course, he still half expected her to show up quite cheerfully sometime during the course of the evening. He was betting she'd been there at the latest 2 or 3 mornings ago. "Gods, I hope he's overreacting, but she's still a baby," he muttered to himself. "Russ, find anything?" "I haven't started looking yet," he called back, hoping his voice would carry as he forced himself to start moving and actually look, instead of letting his thoughts get away from him. Colin came clattering up the stairs a moment later. "Well, Morgan is quite the bachelor," he said with a grin as he took in the messy sheets and dirty glasses. "She reminds me of Rye." "Rye's messy?" Russ asked absently as he peered underneath the mattress to make sure she hadn't hidden her notes and records in the most obvious place. "I would say she reminds me more of you. Rye at least throws things away." He glanced up in time to catch Colin sticking his tongue out at him. "Yes, but all my stuff is important." Russ found himself laughing. "Colin, you're an idiot." "No insulting your boss." Russ snorted. "Really? That's your defense?" Colin had the grace to look sheepish for a moment before he stuck his tongue out again. "Are there any other rooms we should check?" he asked primly. The smirk on Russ's face grew. "Oh, stop that," Colin said defensively, holding up his hands. "There's absolutely no need to mock me." "Mocking's part of my nature. Surely you know this by now," Russ said mildly, as he started to rifle through the dresser drawers. "I thought it was Soren's influence. You didn't mock before the Battle of Oakbridge," he muttered. That actually startled Russ. "I didn't?" "No, you were very earnest mostly." "Then being around Soren got me back to a place where I could," he admitted quietly. Colin met his gaze. "Well," he said much more seriously, "I'm glad for it." They stood in slightly awkward silence for a moment. "Are there any other rooms?" Russ was relieved for the escape. "Yes, the bedroom across the hall. There appeared to be footsteps leading to that one, too. I'll check it." He disappeared back out the door. Russ really owed Colin that story. He moved to the dresser and found a few pieces of what were probably Morgan's clothes until the bottom drawer, which was empty other than a small blanket decorated with different color horses. He touched it gently, running a finger along the road that ran the length of it. He checked the edges of the drawer before slipping his hand underneath the blanket and feeling around. It took only a second to retrieve the papers once he found them. "I found them," he called to Colin. "What's she got to say?" "I haven't gotten that far. She's a writer." The other man appeared at his side and deftly took the papers. "Come on, let's go see what she has to say." "I hope it says you're overreacting," Russ told him, as they headed back downstairs. Because that was so much better than any possible alternatives. The older man shrugged as he sat down on the couch and flipped through the sheets. Me too. Okay, let's see. Got here mid-afternoon. Place is a dust nightmare, so I spent the early afternoon making it livable. I was glad by evening that the shades had been shut previous to my arrival, because the whole neighborhood feels off. Even with my training, I don't think I want to go around after dark out here. Colin ruffled through them, scanning as he went. She explains much of what you explained on our way in, he noted. Russ glanced up, impressed. It wasn't often that an outsider could pick up on the inner politics of the gloomy city so quickly, even with the basic kin training. His estimation of Morgan titched up a notch. And her last one is dated 2 days ago. Up until that point, she'd been logging 2 reports a day. Goddamn, what'd she say on the last day? Nothing of importance, Colin said. Just that she was heading out again and was hoping to collect the last information so she could head back. That would have been yesterday or even the day before. Information on what? She didn't specify. She was a bit vague at points. I'm going to guess she was planning on writing up most of it in one big report. And thus we see why you don't do that, Russ pointed out dryly. Colin rolled his eyes. I don't know how we're going to find her. She didn't leave much to go on. You must have left almost the moment she vanished. That's good even for you, Russ said. Mostly had a bad feeling. Stephen and Belle were in Oakbridge, and both had stopped here briefly on their way to a mission previously, and when I mentioned Grayspire, they gave you their first impression. Yeah, and it didn't seem welcoming. I thought if nothing else, Morgan needed backup. Then her note didn't come that day in the mail, so I left for Hilltop. He shook his head and returned to the papers. Russ didn't reply, staring at the top of Colin's head as he sat hunched over the papers, reading them in more detail for any sort of clue. He took a deep breath, mind flashing to the room at the end of the far end of the upstairs hall for the briefest moment. I can find her. Colin asked, absorbed in his reading. I can find her, he repeated more loudly. Now Colin's head came up. You know where she is. Russ snorted, trying to relax the muscles that tensed the moment the words left his mouth. I have strong suspicions, yes, but more, I know how to confirm it, and maybe find us some help. How? I know people? Yes, but you made it sound like you didn't want to use those connections. I didn't. I don't. But if the difference is that or not getting Morgan back safely, I'll use my connections. I'm not sure how welcome I am here anymore. Would it help or hurt if I came with you? Hurt for now. There's no trust of the law. Grayspire doesn't have much of a constabulary, and what there is mostly for show because the monarchy requires it. Okay then, I'll stay here. Are you going now? Now is better. I'm not a local anymore, so moving at night, as Morgan pointed out, is my best bet. Then I'll put dinner together. That would be great. Not that he was sure he'd be able to eat after this, depending on how the meeting went. Story after? I don't want to push, but it seems like it's going to affect us. Story after, Russ promised. Over dinner. We've got a deal. Please be careful. I will be. Promised Dean, didn't I? I'm hoping Shannon won't make this hard on me. If I'm lucky, Matt'll find me first. At the question on Colin's face, Russ smiled slightly. My 2 childhood best friends, but, well, it's complicated. I'll be back soon either way. Complicated like take Morgan complicated, or complicated in the way friendships can be? The second. No, if Morgan understood the city like it seemed like she was coming to, the person who took her, I'll have to kill him. It was cruel to leave on that note before Colin could respond, but Colin pulled these kinds of stunts all the time, and Russ was antsy to get this over with. He truly had no idea what kind of reception he'd get from Shannon in particular. Matt, at least, had written some over the years and seemed to hold no ill will. Once outside, Russ took a deep breath of moist air and smiled at the familiar smells. Despite the painful memories, there was something nice about coming home. He paused outside the door as he mentally mapped out the best way to get where he was going. After a moment, he nodded to himself and set off at a quick trot deeper into Weaver territory. Someone would be around the old wishing fountain in what used to be the center of the guild's domain, if they let him get that far without challenging a stranger's right to be there. He strode along, making sure his gait was confident as he could feel eyes watching him fairly quickly after leaving the house, which meant it was only a matter of time. Within 4 blocks, 3 teens, 2 boys, 1 girl, slithered out of the fog to block his path. Russ knew at least 3 more would be watching from out of sight. Hello, the oldest, a boy in his late teens, greeted him cautiously. Where are you headed, stranger? This isn't free land. To the wishing fountain, Russ replied, adopting an air of nonchalance as he tried to stem the flow of memories. This had been him once upon a time, flanked by Shannon and Matt. I don't think so, mister. Strangers aren't allowed there without permission. Russ nodded. I know, but I need to talk to Shannon, or Matt if Shannon's busy. The boy's eyes narrowed as he tensed. How do you know their names? Because I'm an old friend and I need to talk to them. Oh, really? And who are you? The boy demanded. Russell Darcy. Although none of the 3 in front of him moved a muscle, Russ was aware of their sudden stillness, and that of the invisible watchers. Russell Darcy, the lead kid repeated slowly. Yes? The kid whispered something to the girl, who nodded and vanished back towards the fountain at a run. You're Darcy. That's right. What the hell had Shannon and Matt been telling the next generation? His name was clearly known. Why are you back? He asked, raising his chin defiantly. Russ had to smile. Good for him. I'm here to help a friend I think has gotten into some trouble with the locals, he said. And you didn't tell them to be careful. His voice this time held more than a little scorn. I didn't know she was coming until after she disappeared. At that word, he heard murmurs around him, and the younger boy flinched. Russ pressed his lips together. That bad? You should know, the other boy said flatly, before turning away to whisper with his sidekick. He forced himself to stand still, heart pounding. Russ kept his hands far from his belt and sword to keep from seeming threatening. Finally, a familiar woman appeared out of the gloom behind the boy. What's all this, Paul? This one says he's Russell Darcy, the kid said with a dismissive nod of his head. Russ knew it was an act, though, and the kid wanted to know all the detail. He would have, too. Shannon Culver hadn't changed much in the intervening years, and it made him wonder if perhaps he, too, hadn't changed as much as he thought. Her green eyes still had the ability to pin anyone in place, as they did now, meeting his. Russell Darcy, she repeated slowly, as if testing the name. He didn't reply, finding himself unable to open his mouth, paralyzed by the overwhelming gush of feelings that came with their locked gazes. Shannon had been more than a best friend, until the day he'd run away without even saying goodbye. And why are you back? She asked, no expression in her voice. His eyes narrowed defensively. As I told Paul, I'm here to help a friend. I'm hoping for some information. And nothing else? Russ pressed his lips together. Then why should I tell you anything? Still no give at all in her face or tone. Because you owe me? Don't tell me you've forgotten. It was the wrong thing to say, even as a question, and they both knew it. For an instant, though, memories lit up her face, pulling it out of the shadows. Of course not, she said smoothly. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised you were where I took control after Taylor passed. Matt? Matt, he confirmed. She sighed. I should have known. He's fine, she told her people, waving a hand to dismiss them. Come along, Russell. He fell into step beside her. So, you need help for a friend. Any information you have would be most appreciated. Then I'll leave you alone again. Is that what you think I want? He glanced at her quickly. It seems to be. Maybe you should remember that you were the one who left us, Russell. Every use of his full name made him want to flinch. There was a moment of silence. What do you want? What do you need to know? I'm a part of kin now, he started. I've heard. He wasn't surprised she knew. He'd known she'd taken over the Weavers, after all. Matt was sure to have told her. One of the agents got sent in without adequate knowledge of how Grayspire works, and she's disappeared. I need to track her down. He saw her tense like her people had disappeared, but she didn't comment on it. You came back. Yes, he said carefully. I came back. And who might this missing agent be? Her name is Morgan Campbell, 17, red hair, brown eyes. Shannon spun on the spot, blocking his path so quickly he had to take a rapid step back to avoid running her over. You sent a 17-year-old into Grayspire with absolutely no idea of where not to go putting her nose. I didn't, Russ protested. Colin did. And why didn't you tell him the stupidity of that? He didn't happen to ask my opinion. Is he that bad at his job? I've never told him I'm from Grayspire. Oh, not proud of your roots, she shot back scathingly, hands on her hips. Russ finally felt his temper flare. God's breath, Shannon, I thought you understood. I might have understood better if you'd kept in touch with me as well as Matt. I barely kept in touch with Matt. You say that like it's an excuse. It's not, he admitted, deflating. But I wasn't in a good place for a long time, and by the time I started to be, I wasn't sure how much either of you wanted to hear from me, if it would just be picking at an old wound for all of us. Then you should have asked. Your boss didn't even know not to send people here by themselves. How much peace have you made? I've made peace with the fact I fucked up, that I let Chris get too far under my skin for way too long, and it cost a lot of people. But you left us here, with Malone. Russ's brow furrowed as he frowned. So it's worse than Matt suggested. Much worse, Shannon confirmed. Russ's stomach clenched. Why didn't you ask for help? From who, Russell? She snapped. Kin, or the monarchy. Grayspire's still a part of Tira. As if we could get anyone to agree to that. The monarchy would completely change Grayspire, and very few are willing to risk it, even in the face of Malone. Kin's a part of that institution, and even more shadowy. Most people don't even know what to expect from Kin. Even knowing you're part of it, would it make it different? Would make it different from any other part of the government? It was and wasn't. Kin operated almost completely separate from the army or any other part of the monarchy. Sure, Colin answered to King Rainier, but only on the big things. King could help fix the problems in Grayspire, and if they felt like it, otherwise leave the system alone. That would depend, Russ said after he took a deep breath to steady himself. What happened here? Matt only said that Chris had taken over the hostlers. And that wasn't enough, she asked sourly, but held up a hand before he could reply. Paul, she called a bit louder. The teen reappeared with both his pals. Yeah? I need you to find out which guild has a teen. 17, red hair, blonde eyes, name of Morgan Campbell. She's a kin agent, which they may or may not know. Paul's eyes narrowed. And if it's the hostlers? Then she's in good company, Shannon said flatly. Be careful and report back when you know for sure. Sure thing, he said, and turned. Margs, Tim, come on. With that, they disappeared into the fog. Do you have a place to stay? She asked. Good company? What does that mean? Russ countered. Best wait until we're inside. We can be fairly certain of who has eyes on us, but not completely these days. You have a place to stay? She repeated, even as she started off towards the fountain again. I never sold the house. I'm well aware, it's within my territory, but that doesn't mean you want to stay there. He pressed his lips together, feeling his heart twinge a little at the thoughtfulness. No, I'll be okay. I've got someone else with me. She looked at him sharply, but didn't ask. So you did intend to return someday, since you didn't sell the house? I hadn't decided. I thought if nothing else, Kin could use it as a safe space. That explains the handful of strangers my people have reported. None have stayed long enough to ask questions of them. Did you ask questions of Morgan? No, but she'd been noted. If she'd stayed much longer, we would have met. They reached the fountain. Russ fished in his pocket for a copper coin and flicked it with his thumb like he had 1,000 times before. Shannon laughed, expression softening. Some habits never die, eh, Russ? He smiled for the first time since he'd found her. No, I suppose not, he replied sheepish. The gesture had been entirely instinctual. He hadn't even thought about it until the small splash had drawn him back to the present. She led the way into the largest of the houses on the small square surrounding the old fountain. She settled herself in the office behind the large desk and leaned back in her chair, waving Russell into one opposite. Now we can talk. It is something to Russell's breath to see her here, so casually in charge. It's different, but not as odd as I thought to see you sitting there. I'm glad Taylor chose you. It was a fight, but with Matt's help, I won. Matt told me it was a bit of an uphill battle. Taylor wasn't quite sure what to do after you left so abruptly. You were the one he was grooming for the position, and you would have done well. Matt and I got the benefit of the training he gave you. I wouldn't have taken it. Even back then? Although that's rich coming from the man Matt told me is the second command of the infamous King's Information Network. It's complicated. Of course it is. There was a mocking edge to her voice that made it impossible to miss. Russ let out a huff. Shannon, maybe my choices weren't the best, but I did what I had to in order to find myself again. Could I have done better? Probably. But I'm not going to apologize for what I've done and accomplished in the meantime. And I'm here now. And you're planning to helping make it right? She asked, gaze fixed on him. Yes. Tell me what's going on. And you're prepared for the fact it's likely Chris who has your agent. He closed his eyes, taking another deep breath. No. How soon until we know for sure? Not too long. Paul, Margs, and Tim are good at their jobs. Then let's cover the background in the meantime. You shouldn't be afraid to speak outside in your own territory, especially in daylight. Tell me something I don't know, Russ, she said with a sigh, pressing her hands together in front of her face. And where's Matt? She hesitated, not making eye contact now. Shannon, where's Matt? Russ repeated with a sinking feeling. When she still didn't answer, his stomach dropped. He's the good company, isn't he? He whispered. She nodded. But the way you talked about him, I thought, I can't show weakness and that I'm missing him. Don't you understand? I'm in charge, and the Weavers are the only guild left with any strength other than the Hostlers. So they're all watching me. In the meantime, I can't do a damn thing about Chris having my best friend, because even as strong as we are, we're not as bloodthirsty as the people Chris has surrounded himself with. Shit, he breathed before ducking to catch her eye. I'm going to help. We're going to get rid of Chris and put Grayspire back to rights, Shan. And Kin's going to help, because I've had to relearn that it's better not to do things alone. So you're not alone, got it? I don't know what the future holds. And honestly, if I'm going to go toe-to-toe with Chris, it could be awfully short. But I'm here now. She searched his face before relief flooded over hers. You better not let me down again, Darcy. I swear. Good. Then in that case, I missed you. Russ felt some of the tension ease out of his shoulders. I missed you too, he said softly. I'm sorry I didn't do this well, but we were all kids and I was deeply fucked up, and it wasn't until Colin recruited me that I started to see a way out. A way out all the way up to second in command of Kin? She asked, but this time there was a note of teasing. You have no idea, he said dryly, but my story isn't nearly as important right now. Tell me everything. I still want it, if we all survive this, she told him, but I guess it's best to start at the beginning, which was your parents' murder and your departure shortly thereafter. Russ went still at hearing the words, but it didn't hurt as much as he thought. Maybe time did start to dull all wounds. Shannon continued. It wasn't long after that Chris made his move and took over the hostlers, and in doing so, started to quietly disobey and push at the laws that had always governed inter-guild relations. You won't be surprised to hear that he had no real respect for any of it. At first, people barely noticed. The handful of us who knew him from before his time at the hostlers was dismissed as fear-mongering. Taylor told Matt and I to flat up shut up, or he'd find another person to follow in his footsteps. He frowned, started to open his mouth to ask why, and then paused. Shannon clearly needed to get this out. When things did happen, everyone could shrug it off. Someone turning up dead, but in a way that could be an accident if you didn't squint. A missed shipment, a mark on a door followed by a loss of business. But it got worse and fast. The problem is, Chris isn't an idiot despite everything. He kept his hands clean after he gained the top of the hustlers for a long while. Or at least covered his tracks well enough to appear to. No one would admit they had any clue as who was behind it all, until he made his move and cleared out the rights leadership, taking over. But by then, it was too late. He had another fifth of the city under his control, and a rapidly growing army of both thugs as well as newly trained assassins. Although he hasn't completely destroyed any of the other groups, we're now squashed into less than half of the city, and that's creating its own friction. I know you know this, but you need to take the fight to him instead of letting him pick people off one by one, Russ finally interjected. She nodded shortly. Precisely my argument, but Cal over at the Masons didn't agree, and Rain of the Smiths is too scared to do anything. It's her territory that's been almost completely poached, and she's afraid if she does anything but take it passively, he'll destroy them entirely. Matt should have told me. I was honestly about to see if I couldn't get in touch with you, Russ, and explain. When he took Matt... Fuck, Russ whispered. Do you think Chris knew about me and Ken? It's possible, but I think his attention has mostly remained inward for now, so maybe not. Matt told me, but it doesn't seem to be common knowledge overall. I've never heard anyone else mention it. And you're sure he has Matt? She gave him a look, which he deserved. I know. He clenched his fists, resting them on the desk and staring at them. This is different from what Ken does. What you're asking me to help with. This is civil war within the city. She watched him. He hated how well she still knew him. Shannon, he sighed, I want to help, but this isn't my wheelhouse. You rub elbows with the freedom fighters, Russ. Are you telling me they don't have any ideas? I was a freedom fighter for a bit, he muttered. That got a smirk out of her. Of course. Aren't half the Kin agents former freedom fighters? Can't you call on anyone? There are two people I can call on, really, Russ said slowly. One is already here with me, the one I left back at the house. The other... Soren was the logical choice. Who had more experience with Civil War than Soren? Maybe a handful of Prince Beau's inner circle, but that was about it, and pulling them away from Oakbridge would raise eyebrows at best. Soren might have insights into Chris, too. The other I can ask, but I'm not sure he's in a position to say yes. That's very cryptic. Can I distract you from the cryptic by asking you to come by the house tomorrow morning to meet Colin Lockholm? He offered. She went momentarily still in surprise. You, both the first and second in command of Kin, came from one missing kid? Isn't he a bit high value to risk gallivanting off to dangerous quarters of the country? Would you hesitate to help a guildmate, especially if your orders had put them in harm's way? No, not even now. That's how he views Kin agents, especially the younger ones. They're like his nieces and nephews. Intriguing. I think I might have misjudged Kin. I look forward to meeting Colin tomorrow. Why don't I report in the morning once Tim, Paul, Margs are back? Russ made an involuntary face. Thought you said they'd be quick. They're quick, not miracle workers, she said, but smiled sympathetically. I know it'll be hard to get some sleep not knowing, but try your best. Matt and your Morgan will need us all in top form if we're going to rescue them and save Grayspire. You'll send word to your other friend? Yes, after I talk to Colin. Do you need an escort back? No, since Chris certainly doesn't know I'm back yet. Just have some of your people keep an eye on the house tonight. If I'm going to manage any sleep, it'll be because I know someone's watching out for sneaks. Definitely. Good night, Russ, she said, standing and coming around the desk. She pulled him into a hug as he stood too. He returned it tightly and kissed her cheek. Good night, Shan. I'm not going to say it's good to be back or anything close, but it is good to see you. Feeling is mutual, but if you do it again, I will track you down, kin or not. I would expect nothing less. He tossed her a salute, let himself out, and headed back for his house.